Let's break it down. I'm Imran, a Middle East based analyst, and today we are looking at a headline that sounds almost unbelievable. China is asking for an India-China NATO. Now, before we get excited, let's be very clear. There is no official military alliance between India and China. There is no signed treaty. There is no joint army. And there is definitely no real India-China NATO in the formal sense. But behind this dramatic phrase, there is a very important geopolitical shift happening. India and China, two countries that were openly tense after the 2020 Galwan clash, are now talking again. Their officials are meeting, their defense ministers are speaking, their diplomats are discussing regional security. And through platforms like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, both sides are trying to manage tensions without allowing the relationship to collapse. So the real question is not, are India and China forming NATO? The real question is, why is China suddenly interested in stabilizing relations with India? And why is India also keeping the door open? That is where the real story begins. For years, India and China have had a complicated relationship. They are neighbors, they are ancient civilizations, they are giant economies, they are both nuclear powers, and both want to be seen as major global players. But they also have a disputed border. They have deep mistrust. China has close ties with Pakistan. India is part of the Quad with the United States, Japan, and Australia. And since the 2020 Galwan clash, relations between India and China became extremely tense. After Galwan, India banned many Chinese apps. Public anger against China increased. Military deployment along the line of actual control became heavier, and trust almost disappeared. For India, the message was clear. Business cannot continue as usual while soldiers are facing each other on the border. For China, the problem was different. Beijing was already facing pressure from the United States, trade restrictions, technology limits, and growing suspicion from the West. So China did not want India to completely move into the American camp. And that is the key point. China does not need India as an enemy. China wants to prevent India from becoming a full strategic partner of the West against China. This is why Beijing keeps using language like partners, not rivals. This sounds simple, but in geopolitics, words are signals. When China says India and China should see each other as partners, it is not just being friendly, it is trying to shape India's strategic choices. It is saying, do not become part of a Western containment strategy. Do not let Washington use you against Beijing. Do not turn Asia into another NATO-style confrontation. Now, from India's side, the calculation is also very careful. India wants strong relations with the United States. India needs American technology, defense cooperation, investment, and support in global platforms. But India also does not want to become a junior partner of anyone. India's foreign policy is built around strategic autonomy. That means India wants to work with the US, buy oil from Russia, engage with Iran, participate in BRICS, attend SCO meetings, and still protect its own national interest. This is why India talks to everyone: Washington, Moscow, Tehran, Beijing, Tokyo, Canberra, the Gulf countries, Europe. India does not want one relationship to control all others. So when China reaches out, India does not automatically reject it. But India also does not blindly trust China. That is the balance. Now let's talk about the latest signals. In early 2026, Indian and Chinese officials held a new round of strategic dialogue in New Delhi. Both sides discussed bilateral relations, regional issues, and border stability. Then, at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Defense Ministers meeting in Kyrgyzstan, India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh met Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun. This does not mean friendship has returned, but it does mean communication channels are open. And in geopolitics, open communication is important because when two nuclear powers share a disputed border, silence can be dangerous. Now, why would China want this reset? There are three major reasons. First, China is facing pressure from the United States and its allies. The US has been building security networks around the Indo-Pacific. The Quad is active, AUKUS is active, Japan is increasing defense spending, the Philippines is allowing more US military access, Taiwan remains a flashpoint. So from China's perspective, if India also fully aligns with the US. Beijing faces pressure from the east, the south, and the Himalayas. That is not ideal for China, so China wants to soften India. Not necessarily make India an ally, but at least stop India from becoming a hard enemy. Second, China wants stability in Asia. China's economy is facing challenges. Its export model is under pressure. Foreign investors are cautious. Youth unemployment has been a concern. Property sector problems continue to affect confidence. In this environment, China does not want another major border crisis with India. A stable India-China border allows Beijing to focus on other priorities. Third, China wants to strengthen non-Western platforms like BRICS and ESCO. India is an important part of BRICS. India is also a major global South voice. If China and India fight constantly, BRICS looks weak. But if India and China can at least cooperate inside BRICS, then the platform becomes more powerful. This is why China supports more coordination with India in these forums. Now, why would India be interested? Again, three reasons. First, India wants calm on the border. India cannot afford permanent military tension with China while also watching Pakistan, the Indian Ocean, and internal security challenges. Every soldier, every road, every airbase, every missile system along the border costs money. If dialogue reduces tension, India benefits. Second, India has a huge trade relationship with China. India depends on Chinese imports in electronics, industrial components, solar equipment, chemicals, and manufacturing inputs. Even when political tensions rise, economic reality remains. India wants to reduce dependence on China over time, but that cannot happen overnight. So India needs a managed relationship. Third, India does not want to be trapped in someone else's geopolitical war. This is very important. India wants to counter China where necessary, but India does not want Washington to decide India's China policy. India wants freedom of action. So India will cooperate with the US in some areas, compete with China in some areas, and still talk to China when needed. That is the Indian strategy. Now let's come back to the phrase India-China NATO. Why is this phrase misleading? Because NATO is a military alliance based on collective defense. If one NATO member is attacked, others are expected to respond. India and China are nowhere near that. They do not have that level of trust. They do not have shared military doctrine. They do not have joint defense commitments. They still have a border dispute. China still has strong ties with Pakistan. India still worries about Chinese activity in the Indian Ocean. So no, this is not NATO. A better phrase would be India-China strategic coordination, or India-China managed coexistence, or India-China tactical reset. That is more accurate, because what we are seeing is not alliance, it is adjustment. Both sides are adjusting because the world has changed. The United States is more aggressive toward China. Russia is closer to China. India is closer to the US, but still independent. The Middle East is unstable. The global economy is fragmenting. Supply chains are being redesigned, and countries are trying to avoid being locked into one camp. In this environment, India and China are asking a very practical question. Can we compete without destroying the relationship? That is the real issue. Now, what has Modi done here? Modi's biggest move is not that he suddenly became pro-China. That would be too simplistic. The real move is that India is keeping all options open. India is telling the West, we are your partner, but not your puppet. India is telling China, we have serious concerns, but we can still talk. India is telling Russia, we still value historical ties. India is telling the global South, we can represent a more independent voice. This is why India's position is getting attention, because India is not behaving like a small country forced to choose. India is behaving like a rising power trying to shape its own lane, but there are risks. The first risk is trust. Can India really trust China after Gawan? Many Indians would say no. The memory of the 2020 clash is still fresh. Border infrastructure is still sensitive. Troop deployments are still serious, so any reset will be slow and cautious. The second risk is Pakistan. China's relationship with Pakistan remains a major problem for India. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, passes through territory India claims. Gwadar gives China strategic access near the Arabian Sea, and Pakistan remains central to India's security concerns. So India will ask, how can China talk about partnership while supporting Pakistan so deeply? The third risk is the United States. If India gets too close to China, Washington may become suspicious. The US wants India as a counterweight to China. So any India-China talk may create discomfort in Washington, but India may respond. We will not be used as a tool against anyone. That is strategic autonomy. Now, from China's side, there is also a risk. China may want India to stay away from the US, but China may not be willing to address India's core concerns seriously. If the border issue remains unresolved, if trade remains heavily imbalanced, and if China continues to support Pakistan in ways India considers hostile, then the reset will remain limited. So, what is the likely outcome? Do not expect a grand alliance. Do not expect India and China to become best friends. Do not expect a real India-China NATO. What we may see instead is a practical, cautious, issue-by-issue engagement. More meetings, more military communication, more border management, more BRICS coordination, more SCO dialogue, possibly more trade discussions, but also continued competition. India will still build its military. China will still expand influence. India will still work with the US, China will still work with Pakistan. So the relationship will be both cooperation and competition at the same time. That is the new reality. In simple words, India and China are not becoming allies. They are trying to avoid becoming permanent enemies. And in today's unstable world, even that is significant. Because if India and China stabilize relations, Asia changes. BRICS becomes stronger. The global south becomes more confident. The US strategy in Asia becomes more complicated. Pakistan watches carefully. Russia benefits from both staying engaged, and smaller Asian countries get more room to balance between powers. But if the reset fails, we go back to border tension, trade suspicion, military buildup, and strategic mistrust. So the stakes are very high. The dramatic headline says China wants an India-China NATO. But the deeper truth is more serious. China wants India not to become fully anti-China. India wants China not to become an uncontrollable threat. Both sides want space. Both sides want influence. Both sides want respect. And both sides know that a direct confrontation would be costly. So this is not friendship. This is not alliance. This is not NATO. This is geopolitics. Careful, cold, calculated geopolitics. And that is why this story matters. Because the future of Asia may not be decided only in Washington or Beijing. It may also be decided in how India balances between both. If Modi can talk to the US, Russia, China, Iran, and the global south at the same time, India's influence grows. But if that balancing act fails, India may face pressure from all sides. So for now, the correct conclusion is this. India and China are not forming a military alliance, but they are testing whether rivalry can be managed. And in a world full of wars, sanctions, tariffs, and power blocks, even managed rivalry may become a major achievement. Let's keep watching this closely because sometimes the biggest geopolitical shifts do not begin with a treaty. They begin with a meeting, a handshake, a carefully chosen sentence, and a signal that two rivals may not be ready to become friends, but they are not ready to become enemies either. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe to Imran Breaks It Down, like this video, and share it with someone who follows India, China, BRICS, SEO, or global politics. Because here we don't just follow headlines, we break them down.